Andy and Remington Steel Show on your screens tonight. It's the Andy and Remington Steel Show for your home delight. We're talking about Age of Sigmar and anything else that is cool. Talking about Warhammer Fantasy, it's easy to learn the rules. Andy and Remington, Andy and Remington, Andy and Remington Show.
Hello there, Mr. Remington. Welcome, folks. So, as you can see, a bit of a new setup here for the Andy and Rem Show, episode 115. Mr. Remington, who's seated below me right here, and it's time to get extra spicy, I think, because if there's one race that everyone knows I'm not a huge fan of, it's probably Elves. But this is going to be an entire episode, well, about 50% of an episode dedicated to the pointy-eared, graceful folk, not just of the Warhammer world, but of many fantasy worlds. And Mr. Remington, of course, is a bigger fan of Elves than I am, so he's going to be providing us with some valuable Elven insight on this episode. And I'm sure you've been busily researching away, isn't that right?
Absolutely. Up to the very second that we started this broadcast, Andy, back from 30 years ago, maybe even longer than that. 35 years of Games Workshop.
We're going to be delving and probing into the deep recesses of Elven history on this episode, and it's a bit of a packed house in the chat as well tonight. We've got quite a few people in there already, plenty of live viewers as we speak. And who have we got in tonight? We've got the likes of Sean, David, Remington is in there. We've got Joshua, Radbat, Wasgob, Alexander, Stu is here, fresh from his appearance last week on the show. We've got Sean, and I imagine just untold dozens of viewers are going to turn up once we start sinking our fangs into this topic. And speaking of sinking our fangs, if you drink the blood of an elf, does it give you like eternal youth or something?
I'm sure orcs and gobos have tried it, not just because they like the flesh, but because they like the blood. New blood, elven blood. Why not, right? They live a long time. They must be doing something right. So, Andy, let's just address this now. What happened to the Andy 2d6 pad? You look like you've got a different background there.
Yes, some might call it the elephant in the room. I would call it the slowly rotating fan in the room back there, which people can see moving right there. So, I have relocated to Nottingham, pretty close to various miniature companies, including the likes of Games Workshop, their headquarters. So in prime position to strike at the industry. And I'm actually living in the spare room of Annie of Bad Squiddo Games. So right in the heart of the industry, right here. So perfectly
How about that?
poised.
Is she gonna be making an appearance on the show?
We're deep in negotiations on that at the moment, working out the precise fee and how many hundreds that'll take off my rent money for the month.
So, Andy, you will be our man on the inside, so to speak. And to celebrate, I thought I should give you a moving in present.
Uh-oh.
I'm gonna be presenting it to you live on air. Are you ready? I think this will take you a long way in life.
Well, let's find out.
Especially because you're going for a new job soon and everything, whole shebang. How about that, Andy?
Oh dear. Is that the secret of your hair colour?
I did experiment with it once, to be honest, but then I had a shave and then it grew back. I thought, I'm not doing this every week, so now I've got some natural white coming through there. I just thought, just before your interview, perhaps you should give this a go.
Well, I don't think that's necessary. I think any grey in here is it's placed in a kind of stylish manner. Look at that, a couple of stripes there. Don't you think it looks quite...
Well, I'll tell you what, Andy, I will pass this up to you, up there, and grab it and have a go, read the instructions.
There we go.
Got it?
Yep, I put it off to
Alright.
the side there. Very subtly done.
Good stuff, mate. Enjoy.
Okay.
So yeah, that's all very exciting, Andy, and it also means that hopefully you'll get plenty of practice games in, ready for when I come up to Nottingham.
Yes, because you're in Nottingham
And
quite often, aren't you?
I'm in Nottingham almost every day in normal times.
Yeah, and with the lockdown starting to be eased now, maybe we're on the road to actually getting more face-to-face games between people. Maybe not shaking hands over the table, but actual gaming. It's going to be exciting, isn't it? If that comes back within the next few weeks or months.
It's it's going to be pretty awesome, man. And hopefully the guys at Warhammer World will get to know us extremely well, and they can hopefully we can work on them taking you off their most wanted list. And who knows, you might be able to be a real inside man there. In fact, I'm just looking up some news. It looks like Warhammer World is going to be open very, very soon. I think,
Oh
is it
my.
this week or next week? Something like that. My internet's being just a little bit slow,
There's a surprise.
so I can't see right now. But yes, any day now, Warhammer World will be open. And other bits of news. I know people are interested in Remington's Millions, our weekly feature showing us how much is Games Workshop worth. Well, its share price has hit an all-time high for the
Again?
third week running. The shares of Games Workshop hit a high of £84.60 per share. That is absolutely amazing. If we'd have bought shares, Andy, when we first aired this show, guess how much they would have cost us in 2015? One share of Games Workshop.
4p.
No, £5.
That was going to be my second
£5.
guess.
Yes, £5. So in 5 years, it's now worth £85 a share.
You could have
So
made some
Games
quite tasty
Workshop
money there.
Games Workshop has done actually very well ever since sort of Kevin Roundtree took over, actually, and ever since Age of Sigmar was put out there, funnily enough. So there you go. And I remember, Andy, going to our model shop in 2015, something like that, 2014, and I would see all the Warhammer Fantasy stuff disappearing off the shelves, and it wasn't being bought, and it was just like, I remember people in the shop saying, "Yeah, Games Workshop's finished. Yeah, they're going to go bust. It's over." How wrong were they? How very wrong.
Well, I'm sure the Age of Sigmar critics out there would also put it down to the various other changes they made around that time, including their increased social media presence. Several factors converged, though, to create the perfect storm that has pushed their share price through the roof. And is it time for you to cash out now? Do you think that's the highest it's going to go, or are you going to keep riding that wave a little bit longer, hoping it doesn't crash with you still on board?
Well, I thought just for fun, it's only fair if I share with you what I've been doing on this journey. Well, I bought in I bought 10 shares of Games Workshop when they were £60 a share. I sold one of my armies for about £600, and I thought, what should I do with this money? I can either put it in a bank, or maybe let's invest it in something that I love. So why not Games Workshop? And then I can walk around and act like I own the place, right? And in a way, I do, even if there's only 10 shares out of millions. But yes, 10 shares at £60. So I'm now £222 up. Should I cash out, guys? Let me know. Should I cash out, or should I hang on and see where this ride can take us? How far can it go? All the way to the moon.
We'll let the audience chime in on that. So, Elves. Shall we start digging into the sordid history of the Elves?
Yes, let's do that. So, where did you first hear about elves, Andy? Ever?
Well, my first exposure to Elves probably would have been in some kind of childhood tale, like the Elves and the Shoemaker, perhaps. So obviously you've got the two distinct branches of elves. You've got the tiny little, like, helpful, semi-mischievous elves, and then you've also got the tall, sleek, live for hundreds of years, kind of fancy pants elves. So which kind did you get exposed to first?
Well, I suppose were Santa's little helpers little elves?
Yes, they're elves as well. They're more of
Yeah.
the tiny little mischievous, helpful variety.
Right. They're sort of cartoon elves, isn't there? I think yes. J.R.R. Tolkien really just turned it all around, didn't he? He took elves from little fairies, basically, with little wings or maybe a little mischievous, to being something noble. And could I even say pious? Pious, noble, wise.
Well, you'd have to be
aloof.
wise if you lived that long, wouldn't you? You must have picked up a few knowledge nuggets along the way.
But here's one for you, all right? Here is a curveball for you guys. One of the first fantasy films I watched as a kid, actually turned me on to elves. And it wasn't Lord of the Rings cartoon from the 70s, although that was pretty awesome. It was a film called Hawk the Slayer.
You have mentioned this one before.
Yes, Hawk the Slayer. And basically this evil guy kidnaps the bride, and the hero assembles a team and tries to get her back. And his team comprises of this one of the companions is this elf, and he's like pew, pew, pew. He shoots his bow 5 rounds a second, and I thought he was dead cool, that character. So that in my mind, when I see an elf, I always think of him, even though he's actually pretty short. But yeah, elves also in Gauntlet. Remember the video game Gauntlet? Of course you do. You had a barbarian, you had a wizard, you had, who's the third one? A Valkyrie. Yes.
Yes,
And an elf.
so.
And an elf. So, elves and bows were always synonymous after that.
Yeah, I think nowadays when people hear elf, because of probably Lord of the Rings mainly, they think of the more sleek, tall elves rather than the funny little one. Although you do still have the occasional foray into that world. Like, for example, the film Elf has a lot of the little Christmas elves, and of course the giant, not quite an elf, lives with them to comedic effect. But we're obviously going to focus not on the tiny little helpful workshop assistants. We're going to be looking at Aelves. So, Lord of the Rings. I'm going to assume that some of your early miniatures would have been the Lord of the Rings ones back in the day. From Citadel, would they have been?
Yeah, now you're not talking about regiments, although the first regiment was what they called? Oh, it just literally slipped my mind as I was saying that. You can still get them; they're very static. All right, I'll come to me later. They were just sort of more individual figures back then. You got Legolas, you had Elrond as well. Was Elrond a half elf? I can't quite remember. You had Elrond as well, but they were much they weren't really tall. They were actually quite short, not short as dwarves, but yeah, the early elf miniatures from Games Workshop weren't spindly, I'll say. In fact, they looked more like they looked much more humanoid.
Well, everything had to be a bit chunkier
chunkier.
back then, didn't it? With the way they were made.
Yeah. You can still get all this stuff, on eBay from time to time. But yeah, the first things I got were generally not elves, though. They were hobgoblins and half-orcs and just weird things, ogres, sort of monsters. Yeah.
So, as time went on, move on to Elf Warriors. Now, these are 1987, which presumably is many, many years after your first miniatures. So, around this time.
Yeah. Now, this is when I bought into them big time. I bought Scarlet's Wood Elf Archers, the box set. This was I had to save up all my pocket money. I did get pocket money actually. All my newspaper round money. I saved up. I've shown this before. That's quite a legendary Regiment of Renown, original box set. You can see where it's been faded in the sunshine there. And the miniatures look a bit like that. Actually, I've got all the miniatures inside. Let's get one out, shall we?
And
Now, these were designed by Jez Goodwin. So this is one of my Scarlet Wood Elf archers there. I don't know if you can see that.
I think you'll have to post some pictures for people on the Facebook group or in the Discord server, which people should be joining, by the way, if they're not already in there.
No problem. Well, Lord of the Rings back then had their own range of models. So I think the first one I got was a blister pack of Sylvan Elves. They called them Sylvan Elves. There's one there. Is that all blurry?
Fairly blurry.
Yeah, Sylvan Elves pretty cool. And then they started selling these blister packs with elf warriors. So yeah, I can even probably tell you which one of these I had. But some of them have the same stances as the later war dancers that came out. I think they just pretty much just changed the heads.
Definitely
What do you
looks
think
that way.
those plastic shields? Are you a fan of those?
On the old kind of generic plastic shield versus the kind of built-in metal shield debate, I think I prefer metal ones rather than having a separate piece that you have to attach like that.
Yeah, back in the early days, the shields were part of the model, weren't they? I think it got a bit messy. But yeah, I actually quite like the plastic shields.
You can be a bit
did
limited with the poses sometimes.
Yeah, but they came in all shapes and sizes, these plastic shields. I've still got a big tub full of them. I've got so many of these shields, you know. So yeah, you had different types of elves within these. You had wood elves and you had sea elves. People forget that, but there was sea elves. I don't know. I can't remember if they had high elves back then. But there you go. So and then later on they merged that concept of sea elves with the Loathen Sea Guard.
So, were the elves from GW, as soon as they moved on from making Lord of the Rings stuff in their own world, were they immediately separated into the three flavours of elf that we came to know and love?
Yes, because you had dark elves as well. Of course, how could I forget those?
And here we've got Marauder Dark Elves on the screen right now.
Yeah, I mean, the way you could differentiate them straight away was in their stats. Like Wood Elves had the best bow skill. You know, you had bow skill, weapon skill, strength, toughness, initiative, attacks, wounds. I think even had intelligence at one point. But yeah, Wood Elves had the best bow skill. And say if their bow skill was like, say, 6, an average bow skill would be 3. A sea elf's bow skill would be something like 4, and I think a dark elves would be 4 or maybe 5. So each faction of the elves had different stats, slightly different stats. But I didn't know too much about the dark elves. I didn't really collect them then until later on. But looking at those Marauder dark elves now, they are pretty splendid, I think.
Oh, they do look pretty tasty to me.
I think they were heavily influenced by D&D, the Drow in D&D.
I think that is a fair assessment. Obviously, that's another influence for the Warhammer world. I think, did Dungeons and Dragons kind of evolve somewhat alongside Warhammer in terms of timing?
Probably before.
Maybe slightly.
Before. Let me just turn my fan off. Give me a sec.
Very well.
That's better.
And I think I've been getting a couple of connection issues here. But hopefully people are still hearing all this, because no one's telling us that the stream is awful. So yeah, it's a little bit slow.
So you had these individual elf blister packs there, and you'd get usually 5 miniatures. You usually got like a champion figure and some foot soldiers, so to speak. You might get a standard bearer and a musician as well. I think they used to sell for like £2.50 for 5, or was it £1.95 was the cheapest? £1.95. So that's about what, $2.50, maybe $3. That seemed like quite a lot of money when I was a kid, but there you go. But it was hard to amass a huge army. You didn't, Warhammer wasn't played, or at least no one I knew had like a vast army. You'd
The
have a
rules didn't really
hodgepodge of
lend
different
themselves to that,
miniatures.
did they? Playing a vast game wouldn't really have made a
Pardon?
lot of sense with the rules back in the day.
No, but when you saw pictures on White Dwarf, you did see dioramas of these great big battles. You thought, oh man, is that how it should be done? Because I don't know, I can't find a whole army of these miniatures. Your local shop might only have 2 or 3 blister packs of dark elves, let's say. So it was very difficult to build up a huge force. And then they had these regiments for renown. So then you had Mengel Manhide's Man Flayers,
Bit of
and
a mouthful
they were
there.
yes. Did I say it right?
Sounded like it.
Yes. And that way you could actually just buy a whole regiment in one go.
So the prices obviously jumped up a little bit over the years, because when I was first getting into it, I seem to remember that you could find like a command group for a regiment for about £5 for like 3 guys in the blister pack. Seems to be about the price point that I remember, like mid-90s.
Right. Okay. Yes, in the glory days of the later 80s, you got 5 for the same price. So, you could get the whole command group in there, plus a couple of foot soldiers.
Now, as we spring into the future here, obviously the 3 main elven factions went through quite a lot of changes over time. We're going to start with the High Elves, and obviously very, very classic elf looking. Of the 3, there are probably the High Elf, you would say, look like the proudest. I think that's fair to say, isn't it? The most, how would you describe it? The richest looking, the most noble.
Yes, the richest, the noblest, the most heavy on the magic users. They were the ones with the dragons. There was a
Look at
box
some of
set
their
called
models
the
here while we're
Dragon Lords.
talking.
Yeah, I can't see what models you're looking at. I'm assuming you're looking at High Elves, right?
Yes, these are the Sea Guard, I think, that were on first. Their spears,
Yeah,
and of course the dragon on the shields in the water.
they're great models actually. I never owned those, but whenever I saw people's paint jobs of those models, I was like, wow, did they paint those shields as well? And then I realized, no, that's the actual emblem that you get on those shields. So yeah, it's one of those. They're actually growing on me. At the time, I didn't really take to them much. But of course, typical Remington. As soon as you can't have it, that's when you want it.
I think one way to describe High Elves would be perfect. Very, very sleek, very, very neat and organised looking. And that always drew me to them visually compared to the other elves, who are a bit more gritty.
Yes, they always had the ASF rule, didn't they? Always strikes first.
Certainly in
meant
the
when
later
you
editions, they started to get that kind of nonsense.
Yeah, so when you get into combat, the elves always get the first bunch of attacks in, which meant that if they get a bunch of kills in, the other player didn't get many attacks back that round.
So we're on to a picture of the Phoenix Guard. And
Yeah, these
are
are pretty
they
cool.
like the Guardians of the Elven King or something like that?
Well, they guard what's called the Flame of Azurian. So Azurian was one of the great high elf kings, I believe. And there was a ritual where whoever's going to be the next king has to walk into this eternal flame, and if they survive the ordeal, then they are the true Sun King, if you like. And of course, Malekith, who led the Dark Elf faction, he failed this test and burnt himself horribly. But his evil mother Morathai pulled him out of the flames, and she said his birthright was robbed. And then we realised later down the line that she was actually right, even though they were painted as the baddies, which was a wonderful twist. And Malekith was banished along with his followers, and they then became the Dark Elves. So yes, the High Elves. That's what Azurin was, the Flame of Azurin. So these guys are the guardians of that temple, so to speak, and they're cursed with knowing when they're going to die.
Interesting. Now, we're focusing
So,
more on
yeah.
looking at kind of the basic foot troops here, so we can see clearly the differences between the elves. But one thing that always attracted me to the High Elves was they had one of the nicer dragons. Theirs and the Wood Elf Forest Dragon, I thought were two of the nicest ones. Rather than the Dark Elf Dragon, which I was never that keen on. I seem to remember that one kind of had little chunky arms, didn't it? Rather than the really long, thin ones.
If you're going back to the 90s, yeah, the High Elves had these very long, spindly, scaly dragons with huge wings. I actually had one of those. I sold. Maybe that was a mistake. That was one of the first models I bought, actually. Yeah. The Wood Elf dragon. They later did the Sisters of Twilight, who were two Wood Elf characters riding the Wood Elf dragon. Pretty snazzy model. But yeah, I do like the new. I'd say new. It's probably about 10, 15 old now. 10, 15 years old. But the black dragon, pretty cool. Have you ever seen that model?
I believe so.
Yeah.
So in the chat, Joshua says, seeing all these elves is giving my inner goblin some serious anxiety. Yeah, so in the Warhammer lore, where did the friction come from between the elves and the goblins? Because they were, I believe, adversaries in one of the starter boxes in the 90s.
Yes, well, there was a rule where the elves actually strike fear into the goblins, so it would make them even worse against them. So I guess I can't imagine that Gobbo's ever won any battles against the elves. But there you go. I mean, the elves were better than them in almost every respect. The only advantage the goblins had was perhaps having the numbers.
Because everyone knows that elves and dwarves are kind of classic enemies in various different settings. But goblins and elves.
I think that the rivalry just comes from one faction is bent on destruction, while the other faction is bent on preservation.
Those two ethoses are going to come into conflict, aren't they? Very polar opposite. So now, mentioned Dark Elves a little bit, so onto them now. This picture, this piece of artwork here is from some of the newer Dark Elf lore, some of the units that came out in the most recent update for them before the world blew up. So you've got like the giant Hydra in the background there, and some of the new troops at the front. So Dark Elves, obviously, the evil cousins of the High Elves, as it were. And for those of us who never delved too deeply into the lore, but then experienced Total War Warhammer and saw just how close together those two races are, and distant from a lot of the rest of the world to some degree, then it's interesting to look at how the units from the two armies contrast against each other. And they're armed with a lot of very similar weaponry. The iconography is just slightly tweaked to put it a bit more of a dark and evil twist. Ever so slightly more spikes and kind of evil angled brows on the helmets. You'll notice things like that. Just
and the
show you we are evil.
Well. The colours, right? You know, the
Yes.
High Elves are all like blue, teal colour, light blue, gold, white. Dark Elves, it's more purple, red. You know, they're into blood, sacrifice, hell bent on revenge because of what happened to Malekith. And they were painted as evil. They weren't painted as chaos, but they were an evil faction. But it was a lovely twist at the end of the Warhammer story. but they all got together, I guess, in the end.
And a lot of them seem to have spears and long pointy weapons in the High Elves and the Dark Elves, and even the Wood Elves, I think. So that seems to be how they operate.
Yeah, you never saw them with a hammer, double-handed hammer or hammer and shield. That was the preserve of dwarves, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, and only rarely do you have the occasional unit in any of these three armies that would have an axe, for instance. The Wood Elves would have
Really,
more
I
of the
mean,
short-range weaponry, the smaller swords, wouldn't they?
yeah. Sometimes wood elves would have axes because obviously they live in the forest. The axe-wielding high elves would be the White Lions of Thrace, Chase. Can't say it. But you'd also get axes or halberds, axes and spears kind of put together. That's what the Black Guard would have, which were the elite troops of the Dark Elves. The Black Guard, pretty cool.
Yeah, a lot of the
Makes it
troops are kind of like the mirror image, but the evil, twisted mirror image of one of the High Elf units, aren't they?
yeah. They definitely had more variety than the Wood Elf units. Obviously, the Wood Elves units they sort of combined with the creatures of the forest, so that's why you didn't get too many different, humanoid models with the Wood Elves, but you did with the Dark Elves and the High Elves. More
Speak,
monsters as well with the Dark Elves.
Speaking of Wood Elves, nice piece of artwork here with a bit of Wood Elf action going on. You can see in the background some tree folk and some birds, obviously. So Wood Elves, lots of monsters. You call them monsters, but really, it makes them sound like they're not that friendly. But big trees, friendly birds that are their buddies, friends of the animals, the Wood Elves.
Yeah,
It's one of the classic elf archetypes, and you're quite a big fan of the forest dwelling pointy-eared folk.
yes, I
Aren't you?
love the Wood Elves. I've still got a small force of them, and I've converted them to sort of AOS bases, and then they pretty much got deleted from the range. It's just typical of my luck with Warhammer painting. It takes me so long, but by the time I finish it, there you are. But yeah, I liked the Wood Elves. Sure. Um, Obviously, archery was their main thing, so they had some pretty cool characters that could pick off enemy leaders. They had the Hawk Riders, pretty cool as well. Of course, my favourites were the War Dancers, which are sort of naked, frenzy-driven, dancing, graceful elves, and they would have different dances which weaved kind of like elven kung fu. Um, there you go. Yeah, then you had the Eternal Guard, which were sort of the guardians of the forest, more defensive, more of an anvil unit, you could say. And of course, they had the Wild Riders and the Glade Riders, which were sort of skirmishers and charge cavalry, respectively, or the other way around.
Now, in terms of actual how they played on the table, Wood Elves, at least in the last few editions of Warhammer, were very evasive. You didn't want to get stuck in.
Yeah, they're guerrilla fighters.
Lots of skirmishing units. You want to dance around the enemy rather than engage them head on. And obviously, that wasn't particularly suited to certain editions' style of play that was winning tournaments and so on. But you could still have fun with it.
I did see one battle on YouTube back in the Warhammer 8th edition days, and it was basically a line of Wood Elf archers as far back in the table as they could go because they had, longer range as well, and then a bunch of ogres on the other side, and it was literally how quick can the ogres get to the elves without being all shot down? And once the ogres in this particular game got to the elves, it was game over. So they're not a stand and shoot army. They're a shoot and move army.
I think
You
the
have to
High
get
Elves
out.
and the Dark Elves had a lot more similarity in their play style because a lot of their units were kind of equivalent. They changed that a little bit towards the end of the Old World. Dark Elves had some interesting fast cavalry options and that kind of thing, didn't they? They had,
Yes,
for
and they
example,
had great magic.
they had
Magic as well.
the Doomfire Warlocks, didn't they?
Yeah, and obviously spells like Purple Sun, where yes, Andy's face says it all. Yeah, the Dark Elf sorcerer could basically take out a whole unit out of the game. Like your best sort of miniatures with the highest armor save, you'd get this spell which sort of automatically killed a whole unit potentially in one sort of circle range of doom. Whereas the Wood Elves didn't have that. Wood Elves had more nature spells, protective spells, or healing spells.
I remember the one game I played at a Warhammer tournament against an Elven army was against Dark Elves, and some of their fast cavalry did that lovely ye old Warhammer trick where you could reform, move through a tiny gap between enemy units, and then reform again on the other side to attack something.
Yeah, that's stupid, isn't it? I think if you're gonna do that, the other player should get a bunch of free hits. You know.
It's one of those things that makes me pleased that that game has been replaced with other systems now. It seemed like a needless level of complication having to rearrange your unit multiple times in the same turn.
It's funny, Andy. It's like I'm watching a bunch of YouTubers today and yesterday talking about the new Lumineth Realm Lords book, and straight away they're looking for the strongest builds and what shenanigans they could probably do in competitive war games. And it's just whatever floats your boat, right? But for me, it's just such a turn off because my first thing is, what do the models look like? Do I like the models? Do I like the aesthetic of the army? Do I like the lore of the army? The stories, the characters.
And we'll get our final judgment on the Lumineth shortly, but first of all, they're not the initial elves in the Age of Sigmar world, because you could argue that the Sylvaneth are just as elfy as the Lumineth. They're just a little bit naturisty, shall we say, and not in the naked kind of way, in the we're gonna merge with trees kind of way. So, how did you feel about the Sylvaneth, obviously being a Wood Elf veteran? You're now seeing your beloved elves merged with the trees they love so most, which is a bit of a trend in Age of Sigmar. You've got goblins with spiders, you've got dwarves being merged with gold and fire.
Well, there's only actually one unit, really, 2 units that would. I figured, look, if you're going to do it, go all the way with it. Make all the units part elf, part tree. But instead, it was only you had tree spike revenants, didn't you? And the other one where the models look really cool actually, but they're sort of elvinoid creatures stuck in a tree. I'm not really selling it very well. And that was it. And then you had Dryka model, who was the sort of malevolent wood elf spirit. She was stuck in a tree. And her new model was brilliant. There's like beehives in the tree, but that was it. The rest of the army is just trees. So
Yeah,
for me, I did go all in on
just
Sylvaneth.
trees.
I like the trees as a sort of complementary force to the wood elves. Where you had a tree man as your big monster, you had some dryads and perhaps some tree kin, and the rest were I like that blend. But
So
when it became just Sylvaneth, it was like no.
the Wood Elves were so eco-friendly and friends of the forest that, of course, the tree men and the dryads and such, and the animals, would fight alongside them because they know that they're the protectors of the forest. And
Yeah.
when the world was blown up and kind of smushed and then expanded again, they're now merged with that which they loved so dearly.
Yeah, and it's almost like in the storyline now, it's like the Sylvaneth sort of hate the elves for not living up to their end of the bargain of protecting the forest well enough. But the main spirit of the Sylvaneths is Ilaria, right? And that's an amazing model. She's on a giant beetle. But where are her other elven kin? It seems really odd that all her minions are all trees and there's no other humanoid creatures. I don't know. That's a separation just for me. I didn't like. It's almost like the Wood Elves got completely written off.
So in the chat, you have been referred to as a casual Timmy.
Oh,
I'm
Timmy.
assuming that that's a name they give to. They have different names for the different player types in war games, and it seems like you fall into the Timmy bracket where you just pick the models that you think look nice. Do you wear that badge with pride?
That's part of it. Yeah, I don't like categorizing people. You know. What are you then, Andy? You're
Well,
Timmy. What is it?
I don't think
Timmy, Tommy, Jimmy,
I'm
Jeff.
not quite as far along on the Timmy scale as you. So maybe if there's like a Jimmy that's part way there, because I initially buy the models that look good, and then if something's doing well for me, then I might add more of it. But I usually get a bit of everything to start with, so we're definitely on a similar wavelength in that department. Whereas you will just buy one of everything and then that's it.
Yeah, one of everything. Or if I particularly like something, the thing is, I then start reading the rules and then think, actually, you maybe want to get some more of that particular unit because 5 or 10 models isn't enough, and then it's a slippery slope. Your armor becomes like, it doesn't become like so much of a showpiece anymore. It becomes, yeah, I don't know.
Well,
I don't know. Take my goblins right in there. Okay, so I've got like 30 night goblins. I've got 20 squig riders even. Squig, mangler squig, 6 trolls. But the thing is, if you get 12 trolls, you now can't have a bunch of other stuff that you want in your army. So what happens here?
okay, I'll have to go through and edit this video at the end, I think, to make sure it's all good. So, Mr. Remington's internet is obviously notoriously unreliable, and mine is actually slower than usual at the moment. So I'm going to have to go and chop any parts of this video where the stream quality is less than optimal. A couple of people said the video has been choppy at times, so that'll be fixed at some point. So we're looking at the Lumineth now. So first of all, we've got these archers, and I think we've spoken about these before, so we don't need to linger on them too long, but the practicality of having the bowstrings we thought was a bit odd.
Bowstring. Bowstring. What? Where are we?
Oh dear. The Lumineth and their triple bowstrings.
Oh, we're on that picture. Okay, yeah, I'm with you now. Sorry, mate. Yeah, I thought initially it was just going to be one character that had the 3 bowstrings. You know, that makes sense. You know, the mightiest Lumineth elf ranger. You know, is like that. But then it's like, no, that's every model has those. So the problem is, for me aesthetically they override the actual model. The weapon overrides the model. But you know, I'm looking at these pictures you sent, and you're all about to see them too, and they do look better than when I saw them 3 months ago. It's grown on me, the aesthetic of this army. They really have. They're really a thing of beauty and grace.
Okay, so next we've got these
What do you think, Andy?
wielding elves here, and I don't really like the archers. I think the string is a bit on the excessive side. I think a bowstring shouldn't really be visible on a miniature at this scale.
I do like the colour scheme, that creamy gold. Nice.
I prefer the hammers on these guys to the bows. However, I'm not sure about the cow head dangling above their head like some kind of bovine halo.
It's probably really uncomfortable. But yeah, I think people will be swapping out them heads or those helmets, perhaps. Yeah, for sure. You know, you could get your old high elf models and put these heads on. You've got spare heads. I'm sure people will be doing some interesting conversions.
Now, as much as I like the hammers, I will admit it looks like they're about to play croquet.
Yes, they are more like croquet hammers, aren't they?
Yeah, so as long as the gimmick for them is that they're playing croquet with the enemy's heads, then that's fine by me.
It'd be funny if they had some horsemen that had those hammers. They'd be like polo players then, wouldn't they?
That would be interesting, actually. So we're onto this guy with the tiny little spindly part in the middle, which Presumably, it's somehow protected against snapping in half. But he's seated, cross-legged, on top of this little strange pillar with trees growing around him. Cool model. It reminds me of a slan. But again, the horns aren't
this
really
is my
doing it for me.
favourite model.
What do you think about the horns, though?
This is my favourite one. Love it. I might buy this model. He looks very zen-like, doesn't he? Reminds me of Monkey Magic. And it almost looks like he's got these big, thick sideburns. But that's actually part of his helmet. But, you know. Yeah, I love this model, man.
Maybe his helmet is only that shape to contain his sideburns.
It doesn't look particularly dangerous, his weapon, does it? You know, you can't really...
I'm assuming he's a spellcaster and he uses
slice.
it more to cast spells at you.
Right, okay. The other thing I love is that little tree.
I think more miniatures should have tiny little trees on the bases.
Absolutely. Absolutely, mate.
So next we've got the mountain cow with giant hammer, which has divided opinion, it's safe to say. But I think it looks great apart from the head.
I know there's a couple of head options, isn't there? There's different head options.
Well, there's another one here that's got kind of the double horns and it looks a bit more evil, and he's got 2 hammers. And his mountain looks a bit more... I don't know if it's just the paint job. I think it might be a different mountain, more like volcanoes on this one. I actually prefer this one to the single-handed hammer. Or the double-handed hammer, should I say. For the second one. Dual wielding.
I like the first one, I think. Yeah, I like the top half with all the mountains coming out. It looks pretty cool. Yeah, they've grown on me, you know. When I first saw these, I thought they looked really dumb. They're growing on me.
I'm still not sold on the heads. I think the general consensus is that they look good, but the heads are weird.
Well, what do you think the heads should have instead?
I think the horns are too much. I think there should be something more sleek. Like tall, like the old elf helmets. But they could put a different spin on it, but I don't know if horns were the way to go. It just looks a bit unwieldy for an elf.
Well, it'd end up looking like one of those Eldar, you know, what are they called? The Dreadnoughts.
Eldar Wraith Lords, I think they're called there, the Eldar Dreadnought.
Yeah, I think if they had something
I can understand that
on
concern, but they haven't really been too concerned about the Bone Reapers looking so much like the Necrons. So I don't know whether that's something they really care about, or even the Stormcast looking like Space Marines.
Yeah.
So, next we've got this character here holding a big chalice with a veil, and lots and lots of windy action here, creating some kind of mid-air danglage.
This is an absolutely stunning model, I think. It's a beautiful model. When I first saw this, I thought the Bretonnians are back. I thought this was a damsel. I don't know about anyone else, but I thought, yes, we're bringing Bretonnians back, or maybe it's some kind of Deepkin model. I don't think she goes with the army, to be honest, but as a model, I think she looks like incredible.
I think that's quite a fair assessment, actually. Does look a little bit out of place. So, next, speaking of things with silly heads, we've got Teclis himself, but he's mounted rather awkwardly on kind of the, what do you call the wing elbow? What's the technical term for that?
I don't know.
Well, he's sitting on there, and this creature, this flying tiger monster with a weird, vaguely humanoid face, which when we first saw this months ago we thought was strange, and it's not got any more appealing with time, if you ask me. It looks very silly.
Sometimes I think, Andy, if there's like an earth-shaking crisis and the whole world gets destroyed, and in 2,000 years' time archaeologists find these models, they might think that these were like our ancient gods that we worshipped.
I really hope not.
Or these were like These were like our effigies of the actual creatures that were around at the time. A bit like what we do when we find caveman stuff.
Well, Steve says, "Oh my, that looks awful." So yeah,
It's growing on me, you know, dude.
people don't really like this model from what I've seen, and I've seen that a lot of people are going to be replacing the head on it. I don't know what I'd replace it with specifically, but maybe I would have gone. I think I might have mentioned this before, but I would rather have given them bird heads than cow heads. Like one of those.
Like ancient. It's like ancient Mesopotamian or something.
I think with bird heads, they would have looked like one of those ancient Egyptian gods. Always looked very good with the beaks. I think they could have had beak helmets, and then the creatures could have had actual bird heads for real.
I actually like his MC Hammer pants. I think the whole army should have those. They look a bit more like Arabian Nights kind of vibe. But look at the detail on his staff. Can you see on his staff? Got this wonderful effigy of like a woman on her knees, holding hands up.
Well, there's a lot of detail, obviously, on all the models because they're a new Games Workshop release and everything's like that. But some of the design choices, I think, are questionable, strange. The heads, the cow theme specifically. It seems like someone maybe dared the studio to do it. And they just said, okay, let's make the best of it and see what we can do. Rather than it actually being a good idea on its own. But that's just me.
You know, Andy, they're growing on me, mate. It's probably too late, but I was really close to buying the box set that's on pre-order.
I imagine it's already sold out.
It's sold out.
I think it's sold out in minutes.
I actually opened it up and it was available, but that wasn't today. It was a couple of days ago already. I got my habit. I think it's 110 quid or something like that. 110 British pounds.
Well, you cash in those Games Workshop shares and you'll be all over it, won't you?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's an option. But then I'm going to need about a year or two to paint and get through the book. By that time, they will have released a new book.
That's always the way. So, I think it's time for the ever-popular segment. What the hell is that? So, when this video finishes playing, there will be an image on your screen, and it's made up of 4 classic elf models. And if these models have been rebranded, I don't want their new name, I want the old names. So 4 of them together, and when we come back from this video, you'll see it staring you in the face.
What the hell is that? What the hell is that? Is it a chaos dwarf or a vampire bear? Oh, what the hell is that? What the hell is that? Oh, what the hell is that? What the hell is that? Only Andy and Remington, Andy and Remy, Andy and Remington know. What the hell is that? What the hell is that? Is it Sigmar's speed or Neferata's hat? Oh, what the hell is that? Oh, what the hell is that? Is it a mangler squig or a sorcerer's rat? Only Andy and Remington! Andy and Remy, Andy and Remington know.
Are you ready? There it is. Look at that. That is Elves. 4 different elves, classic models. Tell us what they are. Who's going to be the first to get one of them right? So I've got a piece of paper right in front of me here with the solution on it. 4 models. Got kind of an emblem in the middle, a bit of a wing on the left, something at the top, and some kind of body part perhaps on the right.
One question, Andy.
Yes.
Are they all elves?
They are all classic elves.
Okay, I think I've got one of them, but I'm going to hold off.
So some of them might still be available, but if they are and they've been renamed, I want the old names only. I will not accept the new names. Come on, folks. Someone's got to get these.
Raf is usually great at this, isn't he? Let's check the chat, see how that's going.
Come on,
Let's see, here we
folks.
go.
Get this. I think at least a few of them are quite easy here. Okay.
Apparently the box set is still up on the GW website.
Oh, well, maybe I heard wrong. Steve says
Evans.
helmet swordmasters. That is correct. The helmet is from a swordmaster.
Well done, you.
One down.
I think I've got the middle one. I've got the middle one, but I'm going to hold off.
Okay. Come on, folks. There are a couple of the what the hell is that legends in the chat at the moment. They should be all over this.
I think the foot and the leg on the right is got to be some kind of giveaway. You see bare flesh. What models do you see bare flesh on? Elves. We've mentioned them tonight, haven't we?
Could be quite a clue. Have you got any ideas for the bit on the left?
It looks so familiar.
Oh, Raphael has pitched in and has got one of the answers actually. So, War Dancer leg, that is correct. So the leg on the right is from a War Dancer, but he says Dark Elf shield. Well, yeah, you'd have to be more specific than that. And wings from High Elf Chariot? Nope, that is not from a High Elf Chariot. Void Captain also gets the Elf War Dancer as the leg.
It is a Dark Elf shield, but what unit of Dark Elves? I know because I've painted a unit of them, so that's why it's familiar for me.
So we just need the one in the middle and the left. Two people have got the War Dancer leg. I assume they were all typing at the same time and haven't just copied each other's answers.
The one on the left looks very similar to the standard bit. The standard you see there.
Quite similar. Raphael says Dark Elf Cold One Rider shield. That is correct. One in the middle, Dark Elf Cold One Rider. So we just need the little piece on the left there. Blue and white, with a little bit of gold trim at the top. Which model is that from? And I can tell you that this model has been reimagined for Age of Sigmar, if that helps anyone. But this is the classic version. Somebody's got to get it based on that clue.
Is it something they carry, or is it a piece of armor?
It is something being carried. It's not part of their body.
Void Captain Bazooka says, I am making my shopping list at the same time as watching this.
Oh,
there you go.
Sean.
Fire something, Bazooka.
Sean
has staff.
Yeah, Sean has misspelled Techless, but I'm going to give him that. So it is the staff of Techless. So let's bring up the solution here. There you go, look at that. Classic Techless, Cold One Knight, War Dancer, and Sword Master. So that is what the hell is that this week. So we're not going to go on too much longer tonight, and I think we're going to have to abandon the Forest of Rem for this episode because the internet connection is playing up a little bit, and I don't want to risk missing out on the flowing narrative of that with a bit of a dodgy connection. I'm going to go back and look exactly how this episode came out, because I think there were a few parts where the connection was lost a little bit. So I'm going to have to look into that.
So Andy, while we're just wrapping things up there, are you going to be buying into...
it muted you, as you said, buying into...
Are you buying into the new Elves?
I will not be buying into the new Elves. If I'm going to be doing anything with Age of Sigmar, which I'm sure I will, because I'm in decent proximity to Warhammer World now, so I should be... Then I would probably continue with my Caradron Overlords, because I've already got enough Stormcast. Don't need any more of those. But Caradron Overlords, maybe. Considering with the previous army I did of them, I ended up making a profit while keeping 3 units. So might dive back in there, buy a model to start with, see how it goes.
You could combine them with the dwarves, couldn't you?
So we've got some people disappointed that the Forest of Rem is going to have to wait till next week. But I'm afraid that's how it's going to be, because there is a little bit of an issue with the connection afloat and support it, especially in these times of uprooting, moving halfway across the country into the heart of the wargaming universe. Then feel free to donate down in the description. And there are some perks available on the Patreon page now if you want to check that out. Also, don't forget to check out the Facebook group, the Discord server, which is going to be buzzing with activity over the next few weeks. And it's a great way for people to chat with each other in the Andy and Rem Show community. There's Twitter as well down there. There's Mr. Remington's channel. Don't forget to subscribe to that if you want to see a video in 2027 at some point. And I think that's going to be all. So, Mr. Remington, would you like to say goodnight to our audience?
Good night to our audience.
And I'm going to bring up the episode thumbnail before we start the outro. And many apologies if your stream had any issues with it and it occasionally cut out and you were forced to refresh. Hopefully if you're watching this later, then any issue-laden areas will have been snipped out and you won't have to worry about it. But all that remains to be said now is, good night out there, whatever you are.
It's the Andy and Remington Steel Show on your screens tonight. It's the Andy and Remington Steel Show for your home delight. We're talking about Age of Sigmar and anything else that is cool. Talking about